welcome back to our chapter number 2 of Street Touring Reviews. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. We are very pleased with all the feedback that we got from the first issue, and now we are coming for more. Now we are with Nick Brennan. He's a filmmaker from Maine, here in the United States. So he filmed a documentary about a Cuban band named Zeus, and this is what we got for today. Okay, so stay tuned, and we're coming back for more. Okay, stay tuned, guys.
Tú puedes hacer tu arte, puedes criticar, puedes decir las cosas que están mal hechas, pero no te puedes pasar tampoco, ¿entiendes? Porque puedes tener consecuencias, ¿entiendes? Entonces aquí tienes que hacerlo todo dentro de los parámetros. Fuera, estás embarcado.
Este es Maxi Rock, el sitio donde está la agencia cubana de rock, la empresa artística que nos representa a nosotros los rockeros de la ciudad. Este es el escenario del metal en la ciudad de La Habana. No existe otro.
Todo lo que sucede en Cuba, de nuestra vida, está vinculado al Estado y al gobierno. Tanto la cultura como la salud pública, como la educación, hasta el rock.
Entonces, ¿tú crees que mañana por la noche el Longa se acueste?
No, claro.
Hay que moverse un poco. Yo no sé por qué.
Mira.
Dime. No, esto no se oye.
Dime. Wow.
Son 20 años de mucha lucha, mucho ímpetu y mucha fe en lo que estamos haciendo. Lo único que nos hace falta es culminar una gira nacional en Cuba. Ese es nuestro sueño.
Long time no see. Last time we saw each other was in Miami, right?
In Miami a couple of years ago now. I think that would have been 20 or 13.
No, it was, I think it was more. We've been here for like
2012 maybe even.
we've been here like for 4 years, I guess. So
You guys don't look a day older.
okay, let's
exactly.
go into it. Okay.
Yeah,
Hey,
sure.
Nick, our first question is gonna be like, who was Nick Brennan before going to Cuba?
Who was Nick Brennan before going to Cuba? Was there a Nick Brennan before I went to Cuba? I mean, who knows? I would say I was still quite a freaky. I was younger. I was 20 when I went to Cuba for the first time in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I was a younger, skinnier. They called me my nickname on that first trip, and I don't know what happened to it. People don't
Flaco.
say it anymore, but my nickname on that first trip was Flaco.
Flaco.
Yeah, that's skinny. That means skinny.
Okay, but you were related to the film industry, or you were like
Yeah. So I was in film school. So and that was sort of what allowed me to travel to Cuba for the first time as a full-on American without family in Cuba. In 2009, it was quite difficult. And
there were no relationship between.
There was no, yeah, exactly. So as someone without family there was like a few loopholes that you could do to travel to the country. And for me, or basically at NYU, where I went to film school, had and still does have a pretty amazing study abroad program, and that fits through the educational loophole. So I was able to travel. I was in my junior year at school, and was able to do a documentary program and spent 3 months traveling around. We went all the way out to Guantanamo. We traveled to a whole bunch of, we were in Santiago. I went to we made a beautiful film in Granma. And so got an opportunity to really see a lot of the country and make a series of films. And one of those was a short film called Hard Rock Havana about Zeus. And that really is what started this whole freaky adventure.
So how do you came up with the idea of filming a documentary about a Cuban metal band? How was that process?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a class assignment, so I had to come up with a goddamn idea for a final film, you know. And my first two projects during that trip were pretty boring, I would say. They were like, my professional background and what my sort of career path was doing journalism, video journalism. So my first two films were on that trip were kind of like these boring broadcasts, like not really creative news stories. Like I did a story. First project I did was about these fishermen. A fisherman in that fishing village between Miramar and Vedado.
Okay.
And I was interested in telling his story because as a fisherman in 2009, he was able to get farther away from Cuba than, you know, he was able to like at a time when you still needed to have an exit visa, you know, like he was able to get
like a permit to go out.
Yeah, exactly. So I did a story with him, which is pretty straightforward. And then my second film was about Sepramuta. And like following, but it was like a typical like broadcast news kind of like piece, but like a fun story, but not, you know, we interviewed Juan Carlos Tavillo for it. You know, he's got that beautiful Sepramuta comedy. And so for the final film, I was like, man, I want to do something fun. And my Cuban friend who I've been working with had been making me film all these like awful electronic dance concerts.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was like, Abel, man, this music's garbage. Like, why you did this once? Well, yeah, I was like, you did this once, now you're doing it again. How many films about freaking electronic dance music do you want to make, man? And he's like, well, what kind of music do you like? And I was like, oh, I like rock and roll. I'm a drummer. You know, punk. I was like, oh, wait, you got to come to my apartment or come to my house on Saturday. I'll show you a good time. And he lives on the same block on Busan, on the same block as Maxime.
Oh, okay.
And so he took me to my first show at Maxime Rock, and I walk in and very much felt like I was transported back to going to a punk show in Maine where I grew up. You know, because there's like the flashing lights and the band Zeus are fucking good. You know, Hansel's on stage, they're just like shredding. You know, Dione's putting on a hell of a show. And I was like, what is this world that, you know, it's seeing so many of the sort of superficial differences between the US and Cuba. It was quite nice and refreshing to see something that felt very familiar. But at the same time, recognizing the like profound differences that exist in Cuba when you then see, you know, the Che Guevara tattoos and you see, you know, the sort of agency of rock infrastructure around it. You sort of like see that you're like, what is this? And obviously that was something that hooked me and something I've been sort of digging at and scratching at and continuing to pursue now for over a decade. But that Dione, I went up to Dione after that first concert, introduced myself.
Ruedan por la ciudad y lentamente se te van afuera la humanidad, se transforma en animal. Ruedan por la ciudad y lentamente se te van afuera la humanidad, se transforma en animal. Rock and roll.
Todo pasa y al final lo queremos todo.
A full. Seu.
Esto es mierda.
Hasta el fondo.
Seu, felicidades.
Felicidades, hermano. Violento. Metrobús. Violento. Metrobús.
Because for a national Cuban citizen, it's difficult to film in Cuba, so you have to go through a lot of paperwork and you have to explain a lot. So what about you being a U.S. citizen filming something in Cuba? I mean, not only a show, but you were saying that you were filming with this fisherman, and so how do you go? Was there any restriction on the government side, or
that was sort of the nice thing about the program? Like, we were in an educational program that had already, that, you know, there was an infrastructure that did all the permits and all that stuff. So as a student, you didn't really have to deal with it very much. And it was a pretty rare opportunity to have sort of carte blanche ability to tell stories across the country. Obviously, then once I got out of the program and started making a feature film, and had, you know, then you sort of are introduced to the big pain in the ass of the professional process, and you realize, wow, what a privilege it was as a student, because everyone else dealt with all the trouble. But I think because we made Hard Rock Havana, we were able to show that and be like, hey, we're not going to make some garbage project. Like, this is our intention. This is what we will be doing. And I think that enabled us to have pretty free reign. You know, we never had permits rejected. We never felt like we couldn't film certain things.
So you never had any approach from the police in Cuba? So like, you cannot film this, you cannot do that?
Nothing overtly. I mean, we did it pretty above board. You know, we worked with a number of really great producers in Cuba through the years, and we were generally always above board as we were doing it. It's always a pain in the ass to come into the country. You know, customs, you know, I usually would tell anyone picking me up at the airport to show up 2 or 3 hours after I arrive, because, you know, there's always some pain in the ass.
Yeah, that's,
you know, it usually wasn't the film equipment. You know, sometimes I'd bring down like usually the music equipment. They're like, what is this? You know, because sometimes I'd bring like you know, equipment and pedals and stuff for the guitar for Avon. One time, yeah, I helped replace one of his big his big foot pedal board, and they didn't know what the hell to do with it. They're like, what is this? You know, like, you
have a clue.
Like, what rock and roll, like what? So that was, the customs was always a pain in the ass, but we never had overt trouble. But obviously, you know, you guys know how it works. Like, the responsibility was really on the band, and the repercussions would always fall on the band, not necessarily on the foreigner who's got the passport and can leave. It's always, and we were always super cognizant, and you see it in the film around what Zeus and what the guys are comfortable saying and showing and doing. So I think the responsibility is really ends up on, you know, the way, the nature of what you guys know down there.
But if you get too political on your filming, so you for sure you will be banned from Cuba, so you won't be able to enter Cuba anymore. So
how do you handle that with the you know, the freedom for you to be able to film everything? So there's a couple of moments in the films that Diony says, so Nick, you cannot film this. So Hansel says, hey,
Hansel says it as well,
about politics. How do you handle that? So internal censorship of the band itself.
I think it was one of the big challenges of the film, is because as a Cuban audience who's familiar with life and who's, you know, you guys grew up there, you know how the dance works.
Yeah.
You understand what is being said when something's being said, you know, like, you understand the 6 different levels of Spanish. But like, and so you understand, like, oh wow, oh shit, whoa, wow. But like, no one else knows that. And this is film aimed at an international audience. So the challenge, and I think very much the dance that was required in making this film, was how to help an international audience understand those 6 layers of Spanish. You know, the 6 layers of Spanish. Yeah, it's even if you speak Spanish, you know, you speak fluent in Spanish, but still, like, what does that mean? You're not going to understand. And that was always the trouble. Was like, you know, I think in the end the band was quite transparent, quite open about their story and their experiences, but in a way that was a real balance of like how to share so an international audience understands life in Cuba and what it means to be an artist in Cuba, at the same time not causing real problems for the band, because they want to stay there, their lives are there, they're not looking to be to sort of
try to avoid some
their life
repercussion from the bands, you know.
Yeah.